Hi, I'm Dr. Larry Foster, and I'm going to be talking with you on Gospel Tangents.
Violin music by Becca Greenouch. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. A non-Mormon man wondered if he might be able to participate in Mormon polygamy. Helen Mar Kimball wrote a response to that letter, not only chastising the man severely for his request, but also defending polygamy. We'll talk more about Helen Mar Kimball's letter with Dr. Larry Foster, and Larry will also give his feelings on what Brian Hales has said regarding polygamy. Check out our conversation.
There was an interesting, very interesting defense of polygamy by one of Joseph Smith's plural wives, Helen Mar Kimball, who then became married to Whitney, which Whitney was it? Helen Mar Kimball Whitney later, but I forget which Whitney she was married to. But she was briefly a plural wife of Joseph Smith, and she wrote a defense of why we practice plural marriage. And she starts it with a very interesting story about a man who had written her. He described a very complicated situation where his wife, he was unable to have sex with his wife. He loved her, he was taking care of her, but it was impossible to have sex with his wife. And he wondered if he were to become a Mormon, if it would be acceptable for him to have another wife. And she wrote back to him, chastising him and saying, "This is terrible. I guess he was living in this type of a relationship. He wanted to see if it could be regularized as a Mormon. And she said, "This is terrible. You're in great sin," and so forth. But if it had been under the authority of the Mormon Church, it would have been okay. This is very interesting to me. And she was a very thoughtful writer. She appreciated the problem he was in, but she really gave him an earful about how he really needed to shape up.
Because it wasn't under authority.
It wasn't under proper authority. And I don't think she ever got to the question of what would happen if he joined and tried to do it, but that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, and I remember, I want to say it was the first Mormon History Association meeting I ever attended. And I know Brian Hales was there, I know Todd Compton was there, and I know you were there, and I can't remember if you were a speaker or just in the audience, but
I'm pretty vocal when I'm in the audience sometimes too.
Well, it was a great session, one of my favorites actually. And Brian had talked about the practice of polyandry, and
he calls polyandry.
Yeah. You.
I firmly disagree with him on that. Yeah. No, I mean, look, this is a really complicated topic, and I don't really know if it's something that we should. I'm working on a paper to try and say what I think can perhaps explain it partially. Okay, of Joseph Smith's 30-odd women that we can clearly identify as having had an official marriage ceremony and with Joseph Smith, and there's Todd Compton has identified most of those people and written very sensitively about their lives, both before and after they were plural wives of Joseph Smith in Sacred Loneliness. But about half of those women were already legally married to other men and continued to live in the household of the other men to whom they were legally married while they were Joseph Smith's plural wives. This creates a very difficult problem, as you can imagine, because the Mormon emphasis is very strong against adultery. And this sure looks like adultery unless you can find a different way of explaining what's going on. Well, Brian Hales, he's done great work by giving us 3-volume, 1,600-page collection with accurate transcripts of virtually all the stuff that relates to polygamy, pro, anti, but he interprets it wrong, consistently, almost consistently, interprets it wrong, ahistorically. And I think his major goal is to actually argue that none of these women that were sealed to Joseph Smith, who were married to other men, actually had sex with him in this life, that they were only sealed for eternity, and did not have sex with him in this life. And this, I think has been almost definitively disproven by Michael Quinn. Michael Quinn is one of the most knowledgeable and most reliable, I think, historians of all aspects of Mormonism, but especially 19th century Mormonism. He's done a lot on the 20th century as well.
Let me jump in there because, and I'll be a Brian Hales defender for just a moment, because I do know that he's done at least 2 DNA studies with Dr. Ugo Perego.
Right, but this is about children, possible children by some of these women.
But I know that Sylvia Sessions Lyon was one case, and he's since changed his opinion since he wrote those books. But he was arguing with Sylvia Sessions that she was married to Brother Lyon. I can't remember his first name.
Okay.
It was consecutive marriages.
Right. Yes, but okay. It doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up if you look at the detail, and that's what Michael Quinn has done. But here's the thing about that particular case. In that particular case, she told her daughter, I'm not sure if
Josephine
Lyon, just before she died, she said, I wanted you to know this, I've kept this from you all these years, but you're really Joseph Smith's progeny.
Yeah.
Well, then we did the DNA testing, and it showed that she wasn't.
Right, she was the daughter of Brother Lyon.
But listen to this. What does the fact that she told her daughter that she was Joseph Smith's progeny? She then knew that she had had sex with Joseph Smith. Even if that particular example of the sex didn't produce progeny from him. So it was exceedingly controversial to have children in Nauvoo from 1841 to 1844 as a polygamist. It was illegal. It would have been totally disapproved of by most Mormons, who were taught to be strictly monogamous and thought that it was heinously sinful to have more than one marital partner or relationship of any sort outside of marriage. And so any children that would have been born would have been covered up. And we have some examples of how that happened. There was a plural wife of Brigham Young's. The plural wives who were pregnant lived upstairs in that house and did not come out. When you were pregnant, there was this thing about secluding women as much as possible, and they didn't go out much. And so food was brought to them and other sorts of things were taken care of. So we have that evidence of how that was handled in other cases. And Vaughn Brody was the one that discovered the letter that also bears this out as well, from either to or from Brigham Young, I forget. I think it was from Brigham Young to his wife who was pregnant, plural wife who was pregnant in the early 1840s. That is such a complicated and convoluted issue. But we have cases. I'll say this about Brian. I highly respect him. I think he's done an absolutely wonderful thing for scholarship by providing all accurate accounts of the different documents. But I think he tends very much to interpret them in a modern way. He has a notion of Joseph Smith as being sort of very straight-laced and so forth. Joseph Smith was a much more lively, spirited guy who didn't hesitate to break with convention, and he was certainly had a strong sex drive. There's no question about that. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's one woman that Hales discovered who I think it brings us the number of married women who were sealed to Joseph Smith to 14 out of the 30-odd that we have. I may be getting confused here with another woman. There's so many different cases, but there's one case where the daughter of one of Joseph Smith's plural wives explicitly testified that he had full marital relations with her. And in his tabulations, Brian indicates her as one of the ones who probably did not have sex with Joseph Smith. I mean, it's that direct. I mean, and it's.
So he's discounting because this is probably the Temple Lot case, I'm assuming.
Some of this is, no, this is not from the Temple Lot case.
It's not?
This is from another manuscript. But there's several cases like that. I'm blanking on her name now. Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner Smith, or Smith Lightner, or whatever, was one of the most knowledgeable plural wives of Joseph Smith. And her case is beautifully laid out in Todd Compton's In Sacred Loneliness. And I would say anyone with a normal mindset who reads the stuff about her marriages to Joseph Smith is going to say this was one that involved full marital relations. And she talks about, when she talks about how he came to her and asked her to be his plural wife, and she said she'd always had this strong attraction to him, and she just she thought it was sinful, and and then she has a lot of trouble agreeing to do it, and then it sounds the way you would expect if there was actual relations there. It just doesn't fit with and she herself then later at BYU in a somewhat controversial early 20th century speech that was recorded is available in typescript, said that she knew he had children, that she had known something like 3 of them, but they don't go by his name.
Yes, I remember that.
And that is entirely what I think would have happened in the case of any married women who had children. According to Brody's argument, this was a way of avoiding getting into trouble with having pregnancies, but then thinking that that looked like they were out of wedlock or something.
Well, and I know Brian's tried to track that down, and I know
he's very meticulous.
Ugo's done 2 of those DNA tests, and they've all come up.
No, I know, but you have to realize the difficulty of anybody being willing to talk about it. Even today, you see how controversial it is today. Even people who are Mormons who believe in, and Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner wrote 2 letters in saying she basically wanted to explain what her relationship was to Joseph Smith, while she could have had a relationship with him while married to Mr. L. And she says, I could tell you exactly how to explain it if you would let me do it, and I'd be happy to do it. And they never responded, and we have no evidence of what she would have said to them if they had responded. But she's very clearly, she said, it's been commented on to my disadvantage, and I want to explain myself and explain why I was doing exactly what Joseph told me to do. That to me, that type of thing to me is very strong evidence that she did have a relationship. Whether she herself had children with him, I don't know. But if she did, she remained continuously married to Adam Lightner throughout the whole period. And he was not a Mormon, but sympathetic to the Mormons at that point. I don't know if he ever joined the Mormon church. Latter-day Saint Church. Oh, well, we'll worry about that. I'll worry about the...
we don't worry about those things.
I think that's not going to stick. It's like some of these names. I mean, it's much easier to use the names the words that were used at the time, and that most people still colloquially use.
Yeah, definitely.
But so I'm going to try. There's anybody who wants to see the really effectively analyzed evidence should look at Michael Quinn's massive 150-page plus, including detailed single-spaced endnotes altogether. It's about 150 pages long on the sexual side of Joseph Smith's polygamy, or something like that. It's available on a number of different sites on the internet, including Brian Hales' polygamy site. They've been back and forth with each other. And I find Michael Quinn's arguments compelling. I find Brian Hales really forced. But I like him. He's a great guy, and he's done wonderful work. And before he put out all of those documents and did them accurately, it was really hard for a lot of people to get them. Now people can, there's at least 5 sources now that you can use to form your own opinions. There's this massive volume In Sacred Loneliness by Todd Compton. There's George D. Smith's Nauvoo Polygamy, Celestial Marriage, but we called it Celestial Marriage. There is Michael Quinn's unpublished but readily available on the internet and very detailed assessment of the evidence. And I'm trying to think who else. Oh, well, and of course then there's another source that is Martha Bradley Evans' Glorious in Persecution on Joseph Smith in Nauvoo from 1839 to 1844, discusses a whole bunch of these cases in a way that opens up some of these issues. And then, of course, there's Brian Hales' work. And he's the lone outlier, really, he's not a professional historian, but he's a very talented historical writer, but he doesn't understand the context in Nauvoo. And so he interprets Joseph Smith more along the Sunday school lines that everybody has been taught.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Larry Foster. In our next conversation, Dr. Foster tells us what he thinks Latter-day Saints who want to know more about polygamy should understand about Joseph Smith.
Latter-day Saints probably need to be, if they're serious about understanding Joseph Smith, need to be aware that there is this problem with his behavior toward the end of his life.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.